Okay. Hi, thank you for staying for this. I'll try to get back on schedule. I won't take all that long. My job today is to review and reporting to you on a study that has taken the last 3 years with a group of experts from the International Academy of Astronautics and others on space mineral resources. And during this 3 years, we've had some very interesting things happen in space mineral resources, which you could also call space mining. And in order to have all these businesses that the panel was talking about, you have to have something to sell, right? If you don't have something to sell, you're not going to make any money, no business. Well, space mineral resources is one of the things in the future that we'll be selling. By the way, the press release on this went out at 11:30 this morning. It's already been picked up by 380 different news outlets all over the world. The audience on it's over 20 million now, and it's being retweeted, and I've got a long report here that we establish metrics and use metrics. We use facts. Now, this is going to take about 10 minutes, and you're going to have to read a lot of words on these slides. I hate to put a lot of words on slides. I really dislike it, but I had to do it on this because what I'm doing is giving you a summary of a big report, and if there's anybody back there in the back that is near my briefcase, you might pull out the report and just wave it in the air. It's about this thick. I intended to bring it up, but I just forgot it. It's 395 pages long, and I'm going to go through that in 2 or 3 pages for you, so please bear with me. We had a professional editorial staff and research staff that was paid for by the Heinlein Trust. I'm a trustee of the trust, but nonetheless, I'm going to flog the trust because I think it did a good job on this. This is a printout of this report. It's being printed right now. It's being published, and we're going to provide copies of this to every Congress, critter, and venture capital outlet in the world. It's going to be good. We're going to sell it for $10, so everybody buy one. Okay, go to the Heinlein Books website. It's a global assessment. It's not just a US assessment or a NASA study. It's a global assessment. And for the first time, we brought together the technology, the economics, the law, which is critically important for this. Hey, it's wealth. Who owns it? Who's going to get the goodies? And policy. Do we really want people up there that can drop rocks on us? Next slide. Now, these are the study participants. You'll notice they're from all over the world. The Space Research Institute of Saudi Arabia, of Russia, Ukraine, the United States, all over Europe, Latin America, China. My co-editor is the head of the Chinese Space Law Association, and that's part of the Chinese government. And so you'd better believe that we had a really thorough check of this law. The head of the International Institute of Space Law redlined the legal section for us twice. We were very, very inclusive. The idea is to give people a virtual encyclopedia that they can work from. Nonetheless, it's out of date because it's more than a month old, and things have happened in the last month, like Charles Miller's activity for in situ utilization of lunar resources that's going to come out shortly, which this backs. Next slide. Certain organizations helped by contributing information. And you can just look at that list and you'll see that it's pretty broad. It covers most of the planet. And it includes traditional people and NewSpace people. Next slide. Some commercial firms helped us out with roadmaps, things they might otherwise have kept secret, and I want to really thank Deep Space Industries for their superb cooperation on this. Next slide. This is the purpose of the study, and I'm just going to read it out loud to you so you'll get it both in text and orally. To provide in one document the current state of the art of the technology, economics, law, and policy related to space mineral resource opportunities, space mining, and to make specific recommendations for moving forward. This study is not designed to say, should we do it? This study is designed to say, What is a good way to do it? What are recommendations for doing it as promptly and effectively as possible? To provide logical, systematic, and practical roadmap to promote and encourage near-term evaluation, development, and use of space mineral resources. There is no comprehensive summary in the current literature on this subject now available that I know of, or that anyone in our study group knew of. This International Academy of Astronautics study is the first comprehensive study on this subject. Now, there have been some good books like Mining the Sky and Space Mining 101, things like that. This is different. This is a very comprehensive manual. Again, it's out of date because it's more than a month old. We hope it will be of value to humanity moving into this new century. Next slide. Now, I'll send this to anybody who wants it, but we set the background saying, how do you mine? Then we describe the market and the potential roadmaps that can get you to profit, and profit is critical. We looked at the technologies that could achieve success, and we conducted trade studies between these various choices. We assessed the legal policy and governance issues. And by the way, since this study started, the government of Holland has set up a intergovernmental and working group on governance of space mineral resources. And then we summarize conclusions and recommendations, and I'll get to those at the end of this talk. We're trying to be very clear, very transparent, and very inclusive. Next slide. This is a list by chapters, and I'll just let you read it. Basically, it follows the logical progression I just read to you. How do you do it? There's a technical approach, there's a market approach, there are roadmaps to the people who are trying to do it now. Next slide. We look at the systems that are going to be required, the various technical readiness levels, the economic trades. We look at modeling and analysis because it's necessary to help people understand, whether they're governments or individuals or sovereign wealth funds, exactly what they're getting into when they invest in space mineral resources. And they will be investing in space mineral resources. There is no doubt of that at all. That is one of the things that came out of this study. Then the most important part, which is the legal part, who owns it, who has rights to it, are our methods and our past history of governance, of how we divide scarce resources on the surface of this planet. And everything from city-states to nations to laws to wars to customs and cultures were set up to divide scarce resources. That is the wrong model for space. Space has infinite resources. We have to set up a new paradigm for encouraging development and encouraging use, not squabbling over who might have this part of this rock. The paradigms of the past are probably quite inadequate, and we do not know yet what will replace them, but we better start looking for them. And finally, the conclusions and some concepts for the future. Next slide. Now, I'm going to plug Heinlein because first, I like him. Secondly, he helped pay for this. And the third thing is that he said something very important. You better look at the facts. If you're going to take and make a decision about the future particularly, you better look at the facts. You better forget about everything else. You better see how many decimal places you can get to and be damn serious. Next slide. This is a fact. We live here. And we don't live anywhere else. We have the resources that are here, and they are scarce in territory, in energy. If everybody on the planet uses as much energy as we do, the planet will not stay habitable. Now, you can disagree with that if you want to. If you disagree with it, you're wrong. Okay? But it doesn't mean we can't go into space and use the resources there. As a matter of fact, as Jim pointed out from Shackleton, you lift the energy resources into space, you reject the heat energy into the background of space, you put the telecom and communication infrastructure up there, you've gone a very, very long way to solving a big problem we have right now. But fact, we live here. Next fact. Now, this is kind of a hand-drawn, crude thing, but do you get the message? Is it clear that there are a lot of us living here now? And in the last half century or so, we've used more resources than in all of human history? And despite that, virtually everybody in the world is still poor? Does that suggest to you that we might have to get resources somewhere else? Okay, so keeping this chart firmly in mind, next slide. Let's see how we divide these resources, and this is for the whole world. Well, gee, about 70% of the world's population lives on 3% of the world's wealth. And if you take 8.5% of the world's people, they have 84% of the world's wealth. Now, this surprised me. I didn't know this fact when I went into this study. And it has one completely clear conclusion, corollary. The development of space resources is far more important to the developing world than it is to the developed world. Those people like us who live really high on the hog already are in the lifeboat. We don't have to have it. It's a luxury for us to have space minerals. We're already rich. For the people that are in the bottom 2/3 of the planet's economic social system, getting space mineral resources is a matter of life and death. And they have something to bring to the party. They have the same brains that everybody else on the planet has. They can produce the engineers and the geniuses, and they can go out and take the risk. Has anybody here noticed that NASA is risk averse? I mean, is it possible that the European Space Agency, Roscosmos, and JAXA might be risk averse? That's because risk is a ratio. Risk and reward. For great reward, you can take great risk. There is no reward to NASA. They want to succeed, they'd like to succeed, but they're not going to go hungry, starve, or die if they don't succeed. So the people that will take the risk to mine the asteroids, mine the moon, take humanity to the next level, they're living on $5 a day right now. And that's the big conclusion I didn't expect from this report. It was a tremendous surprise. It shouldn't be. America was built by those people. We don't have a sign on the Statue of Liberty saying, give us your rich, give us your nobles, give us your people yearning to wear ermine. No. Okay. Right. Yeah, we're better than that. This is the Mr. Pac-Man slide. To get 84% of the wealth in America, you have to have 20% of the people. I think this is pretty revolting myself, but I definitely think that it's a big surprise. I didn't know it. And the part that's getting eaten is everybody else, is the other 80% of the Americans. So if we get space mineral resources, a rising tide will float all boats, even the people that are in the poorest and working poor in middle America, and it'll give us a positive vision of the future. Next slide. Okay, how much do we need? Well, if we want to live like the US, we need 5 planets. We have 1. If we want to live like India, well, okay, we're all right. But the whole planet as an average has already passed being able to sustain itself on 1 planet's worth of resources. That's an important fact. We have to get the resources from somewhere. And, you know, the 70% of the world that doesn't have anything now isn't going to want to stay that way. They're going to want to live like we do. The United States is 3.5% of the world's population. We use 25% of the goods, services, and energy. More than 12% live like we do unless we get it somewhere else or a miracle occurs. Fortunately, we're good at producing miracles. That's why Malthus hasn't caught up with us yet, why we haven't had why we still are around. But the next miracle is probably going to be utilization of space resources. And I would argue that it will be the largest industry of the 21st century. We're only 1.5 decades into the 21st century. We haven't formed the corporations, partnerships, and other entities that will go out commercially, making a profit and getting these things so that they will continue. Not yet, but we will do it. And at this conference, you've heard many people with ideas about how to form these companies and what they will do. I'm saying, here's your resource base, fellas. This is what you're going to have to work with. Unlimited wealth. Next slide. Now, Mr. Heinlein again. I'm partisan. One man's magic is another man's engineering. Supernatural is just a null word. This is Heinlein's version of Clarke's law that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Sir Arthur got it right. Robert Heinlein is saying, if we can imagine it, we can do it. So put aside the things you don't think we can do. Just clear your mind. Next slide. One asteroid, kilometers across, made largely of nickel iron. And I want to make a point. Every single thing on this planet, everything, is available in space without exception. And there's millions to billions of times more of it in space than on the surface of the Earth. If you just realize that, you will realize that the most important thing we can possibly have in space is people. And there aren't any yet. Well, hey, a couple of guys in the ISS, they're too close to be counted in deep space. Okay, but in this one asteroid, 2 kilometers across, a small asteroid, we know where it is, we know what it's made out of. Just the nickel's worth 3 times the national debt of the United States. Have I got your attention? Next slide. Gee, it's not the only asteroid out there. Now look back to 1995. We didn't know that there were very many around. These are the Earth crossers, the near-Earth objects, the ones we can get to easier than the moon, maybe. And now we know where there are 12,000 of them, and the little ones are where the wealth is, because we don't have to break them up into chunks to process them and use them. And today, as a patent attorney, I can tell you, I know for a fact that the primary technologies are being invented and patented that will make all of this possible. And some of it is as strange as suspenders on a snake, but it works. Next slide. This is just 2. These are home pictures, home video. Next one. I want to tell you these things are real. Now, these 2 are in there not for you guys because you know all about this stuff, but it's for the people I speak to at Rotary clubs and stuff like that. They don't believe that these things exist. And you show it to them and they say, gosh, they're real. Next slide. And there are millions and millions, I'm paraphrasing Carl Sagan, of them. And do touch them, please. Do touch them. Grind them up. Make them into good things. It's better than grinding up the Earth. I saw one study. It's not in my study here, but I saw one study that said that if you just took the main belt's wealth, it would be $100 billion for each person alive on Earth. That probably is an underestimate. And it doesn't count all the rest of the belts and rings and moons and, mining the south pole of the moon, which I kind of been getting fond of. Next slide. Okay, now, this is the important part. Where the heck is my little thingy? See, I got one of these things. You think it's a flashlight. Nah, it's a pointer. Well, it can be both, can it? First law of negotiation, when you're given a choice, take both. Okay, major conclusion. Members of the study found, please remember that this study, first of all, had all of those people from all over the world for 3 years working on it, both by internet and through face-to-face meetings, at least 6 of them, at major meetings of the International Academy. It was a very serious study. Second, The International Academy, being the International Academy and proud of it, has a peer review process from hell. Yeah, I think you get canonized as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church easier than you can get something through that peer review process, but we did it. And everybody agreed on this, and it was finally passed by the board of directors, and Americans only form us, they're not in a majority in this group. This is the whole world. And they found and passed that the study group space mining will enable economic travel between the Earth's surface and nearby locations within our solar system. Mining of water from asteroids, the moon, or Mars will ensure that key elements are available at spaceports in the future. Water will ensure that human exploration will expand beyond low Earth orbit, with the profit motive driving the exploitation of resources. With this, the following conclusion is supported. First principle finding, space mineral resource ventures cannot wait for government programs to lower the technological and programmatic risks. Commercial ventures must determine the optimum path for commercial success and aggressively lead the way beyond low Earth orbit. We now have a major international scientific group saying these things, which the Space Frontier Foundation has said for what? Since it was formed. And the National Space Society has said since it was formed. This isn't a bunch of nuts, or at least they're nuts in a different way. Hey, aggressive commercial activity. During the first half of the 21st century, space leadership will come from commercial enterprises and not depend. I wanted to put the word entirely in, and I was voted down. Space leadership will come and will not depend on government space programs. One concept, leverage this series of initiatives, is to convince government agencies that commercial enterprises will be there first and will be able to support government explorations by selling products to them at designated locations. How many times in the last 2 days have you heard that concept from people in this organization? But now it's coming from the International Academy of Astronautics after a rigorous study and peer review. So you can go to the Congress critters and say, it is time to do this. It is not too early to start doing this. Okay, finding one, technological risk in engineering design. The mining of asteroids and the lunar regolith is within the current state of the technical art. Period, full stop. The exploitation of Earth-based mineral mining seems to be a one-for-one trade with some significant alterations due to vacuum, low gravity, and temperature extremes. Many proposed solutions have been suggested and tested on Earth, leading to positive conclusions on this topic. We can do it, we know how to, we can start on it today on the Earth, and then move the research into space through the ISS and private ventures. Next slide. Finding two, the legal regime. Although space is inherently multinational and international in its scope, experience indicates that national laws are the only framework that individual actors, both private and governmental, will accept as a means for specifically developing and acting in space. Mining and ownership of space mineral resources is parallel to traditional laws, and as such is consistent with current international law. International space law has established that national laws that govern national activities in outer space within the current framework. History has repeatedly demonstrated that areas controlled by national as opposed to international law prosper most readily. And everybody on the committee was in consensus on that after the fight of a lifetime with everybody being included. Now, this is an enormously positive step, and I believe that it can be used to back the Space Act that is now pending in the US Congress, and to show that there is a significant belief among experts that this is necessary. Finding three, low-cost access to space. Well, of course, if you have a cheap way to get into space, it's going to make it easier, right? Although space is the financial aspects of any activity focuses on the initial lift to orbit costs. Heinlein said once you get to 100 miles, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. We've got to lower those launch costs. At the present time, the cost is exorbitant, can only be justified as necessary. There are no alternatives. Defining low-cost access to space will enable space mineral resource activities, ensuring that the commercial imperative is supported. Reducing cost of delivery to Earth-Moon Libration Point 1, Lagrangian spaceport, by 2 orders of magnitude will ensure that commercial entrepreneurs will spring up and pursue the vast opportunities then available. Now, this is just 2 pages describing a 400-page study. So please look at all of the economic and trade studies. Next slide. I think this is the most interesting one, and we put this in as a finding, even though it's not really kind of a traditional finding. This study is incredibly timely. We just got lucky because we started it at the Naples Academy meeting before anybody else started any of this stuff. And during the time that we had the study active, it got hot. The economics of near-Earth objects was a workshop at the NASA Ames Research Center. It was conducted in 2014, and its aim was to serve as a catalyst for decisions on discussions, foster collaboration, so on and so on. The summary is in the appendix. We found it important enough that we actually put the summary to this NASA study in the appendix. Then following that up, a very high-level activity was convened at The Hague in December of last year. The result of that was the formation of the Hague Space Policy Working Group, led by the Dutch government, but with the inclusion of many other governments, to talk about governance of space mining activities, not governance in general, of space mineral resources. Okay, and then there was a follow-on meeting in March of 2015, following on to the excellent Ames NASA study in the Duchy of Luxembourg, where half of the people were people like us, that is to say a bunch of space nuts, I include myself, and the other half were people I'd never seen before, but just their suits cost more than my car. They were wealth managers. And that's how the Duchy, by the way, makes its living in Luxembourg. They don't have much of anything, so some neat little bread and breakfast. They make their money by wealth management and by being very, very good at what they do. And it is possible that this just might be something that would be interesting to them, since it encompasses more wealth than the human race has ever had access to in the past. I would remind you that the last time the Luxembourg government got interested, they started a little communication satellite outfit called, SLS or SAMS or something like that. And now it's the biggest one in the world, I believe. Okay. Now, the feature of this is that the commercial space ventures are now aggressively seeking risk reduction and reaching out to form commercial and governmental partnerships. In the past, this type of activity has led to the development of major new industries. Next slide. Okay, I'm sorry I talked for so long, but the participants in this study freely acknowledge this is not perfect, it's not finished. We did the best we could with what we had. We hope it's useful. We've started a second study. I encourage anyone in this audience, you're all qualified, who's interested in this to contact me and see if you might like to become part of this international study. I got permission from Permanov, the guy that used to run the Russian space program. He's the scientific head of the IAA, of the Academy, to include people who are not in the Academy, who are not academicians, don't have this little blue button. And by the way, I think they did it like this because it looks like the Legion of Honor, and sometimes in France the cop will salute you. That's just my opinion. I hope this has been interesting. It concludes my report to you as the people who are actually going to go out and work on the front lines of the struggle to do this, and to know that there is wealth there if you succeed. So do you have any questions? And by the way, if you want to see the report or talk about this more, at 5:30, there is a reception sponsored by the Heinlein Prize Trust for the business plan competition, and it's down at the end of the hall, and I think anybody who wants to can come to it. If they couldn't before, they can now, right?
You can.
Any questions from anybody? Is there anybody here that doesn't think that space mineral resources will be a major industry in the 21st century? If you think it won't be, put up your hand. Okay, so we're in agreement. Yeah, Bruce? Sir, pardon me. Yes, Bruce, what would you like?
Thank you, Arthur. That was very nice.
You got to tell me what he's saying, because I can't put it on thing.
All the way. Who is the target audience for this art? Who are you aiming this at? Is this for educating the general public, policymakers, all of the above?
Well, Bruce, it ain't you, because the National Space Society already knows all this stuff. It's policymakers, legislators, people who control wealth funds, potential investors. It's to serve as a beginning reference for looking at what is now, and to realize that nobody here had an axe to grind. People started out with axes to grind, but they came to a consensus conclusion that I think mirrors the Space Frontier Foundation. Next.
So I had a question. The assumptions on the revenue.
You got to tell me what he said.
Oh, the assumptions on the revenue,
Beautiful
they're based
translator.
upon selling at the street price at that time. Is that right?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Oh, so the question is, you said, for instance, $5 trillion.
What?
Was that assuming that's the street price at that time?
That's not the funding that's
No,
the potential
no, the
for
return,
that
the potential return, but that's assuming you're selling it at. The money you can make. Yes.
Well, you're not going to, first of all, one of the studies that we looked at was to bring back nickel to the surface of the Earth.
Right.
We use 1.5 million tons of nickel a year now. It costs $15,000 to $50,000 a ton, depending on how our economy's doing. I think it was a little more than 15 this morning. And if you bring back 10% of that, you only change the slope of the increase, because only 1 billion people use things that have nickel in them now. But 2 billion will within a year or so.
Well, the reason
You can't bring back so much, you crash the price. That's the problem
That's
with
what would
some of
happen,
the precious metal groups. There's just not enough cash flow there. But if you bring back, you don't have to wait until there's a huge number of people in space to start making money off of this. At least that's one of the possible paths forward. You will think of other ones. I don't know if this answers your question.
Well, the reason why I was asking is that actually, when you actually bring it in, all of a sudden you have a huge amount of supply now, and that's going to drop the
Well,
price, which actually is beneficial, because then more people can buy stuff.
As a patent attorney, I can't answer that question because I'm forbidden to do so by the ethics rules of the State Bar of Texas. But let me say that this is a period of time when most of the major inventions like warping the wing, nobody could fly before you could warp the wing. The rich people, the bright people couldn't do it, but a couple of guys that had a bicycle shop in Ohio figured it out, and by golly, on their summer vacation, they built an airplane. Same thing with this. There are enabling critical inventions that are being made right now. I happen to know that they're being made by some of the corporations in this room, but I can't say anything more than that. Next.
I think
Come on.
that's all the time we have. but-
Somebody has to roast me by saying this is insane, don't they? Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If y'all have,
Exception for the business plan people. At 5:30.
you can roast him there.